Welcome back to the shop, my friends. Steve here at SKS Props, and in today's build video, I'm going to show you how I painted the Ripper mask from Borderlands 4. Now, those that have followed me from the very beginning know that I absolutely love Borderlands, and it's actually what got me into making props and costumes. The very first costume I ever made was a Borderlands Psycho back in 2012. And I have made a lot of masks since then. Now, back in the day, we would actually have to hand sculpt and mold and resin cast these types of props and costume pieces. Nowadays, they have 3D printers, so times they are a-changin'. And I was really impressed the other day to see that with the day one launch of Borderlands, that Borderlands teamed up with Printables and put out free cosplay files that you could download right now. I'll actually have a link down in the description section. And I had seen a bunch of my friends go ahead and print these off. Now, yeah, that's awesome. You can print it off, but I want to show you what it takes to paint it and to bring it to life, because cell shading is what sets Borderlands apart. So I thought this would be an awesome opportunity to go back to my roots and show you how to do some amazing cell shading, because everyone can print one of these off if you have a printer, but it takes an artistic touch to bring it to life. So I want to show you what it takes to paint this Ripper mask. Let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I did was to open the file in Bamboo Studio, and then I sent that over to my X1 Carbon. At a 0.2 layer height, it took approximately 13 hours. This one's pretty simple in just 3 pieces. It's the mask and 2 respirators. To begin cleanup of the print, I start by removing all of the attached supports. I do have a couple of downloaded references off to the side. That way I could make sure to line up the respirators correctly. And once they were marked, I could glue them into place using some Bob Smith superglue with a little bit of accelerator. To be able to sand the print smooth, I'm going to be using a couple of different rattle cans. The first one being a 2-in-1 filler primer. After that had been applied in a couple of layers and left to cure, I could then spray on some Krylon Red Oxide primer. Now I like to apply the red primer on top because the filler primer is gray, just like the PLA. That way I can know exactly where I've sanded. To sand the print smooth, I go back and forth using some sanding sponges and some wet sanding. Some Krylon Camouflage Khaki can then be applied to the upper section of the mask. This is just my base layer for some additional hand painting. And to start the hand painting process, I'm going to be using some Liquitex Heavy Body Unbleached Titanium. This is going to be watered down and brushed onto the surface using a 1-inch mop brush. And to alleviate those brush strokes, I dab the paint using a damp paper towel. A second layer can then be applied using less water and more pigment. And at this point, what I'm really trying to do is determine my light source from above. So more paint is going to be applied to the crown of the mask, above the eyes, and at the bridge of the nose. Next, I'm going to mix in a little bit of watered down yellow oxide to the unbleached titanium. This is going to be applied with a filbert brush, focusing more on the recessed sections of the mask. To help feather the paint out while it's still wet, I use the mop brush to help move it around and get rid of any of the brush strokes. This will give it more of an airbrush look without actually airbrushing. To highlight the upward facing sections, I'm going to be using some Liquitex Heavy Body Parchment. This paint is also going to be applied to the crown of the mask, above the nose, and above the eyes. With this pigment application, I'm adding very little water and pretty much just doing a dry brush. Just like before, I'm focusing on my light source from above. And as you can see in the video, I'm applying the paint to certain areas with one brush, and then while the paint is still wet, I'm feathering it out with another. This back and forth gives a subtle gradation to the mask, and this is a lot more visually interesting than just painting the mask white. Now it's time to start to block in the base color for the metallics, and to do that I'm going to be applying some Liquitex Heavy Body Mars Black to these areas. The first pass with the Mars Black is mixed to about a 50-50 with water. Because this is a heavy body and it's thicker, this will help the paint flow a little bit better. And for any recessed areas that aren't completely covered, that red oxide primer is still showing through. And that's going to be a good complement to all the rust effects that I'm going to add later on. I switch over to a detail brush for some of the smaller sections to make sure that I don't get any of the Mars Black onto the white. The Mars Black paint can also be applied to the bolts at the top of the mask and the rivets on the front. For the recessed sections at the top of the mask, I mix the Mars Black with a little bit of the Unbleached Titanium. That way these parts aren't completely black and they have a slightly grayish tint. To replicate the vault design for the mask, I start by drawing the basic shape onto the surface using a pencil. This can then be carefully filled in using some cadmium-free orange. Now because this is a cadmium type paint, it is extremely opaque. I do add a little bit of water to help it flow better, but I am being very careful not to get it outside of the lines of the design that I've drawn. I know that the masks in the game come in several different colors, so you don't have to necessarily use the cadmium orange. You could also use a cadmium red or a cobalt blue. All of these paints will have the same type of opacity. While I allow that to dry, I'm going to start to paint in the metallic sections using some Liquitex Iridescent Rich Silver. And as I apply this paint with a mop brush, I don't want it to get down into the recessed areas. And notice that I started to paint the respirators with the orange, but I stopped after one coat. To get the colors to be the same on the respirators and the mask, after I apply the metallics, I'll repeat the same process of adding some unbleached titanium and then the orange on top. So here you can see I'm taking that small detail brush and I'm painting the sections that I want to eventually be orange. Having a lighter base color allows paints like yellows and oranges to have a final brighter color in the end. And really it just depends on your mask how vibrant you want it. But here you can see having that unbleached titanium down first, it allows one layer of the orange to cover so much better. With my vault symbol dry, I can now start to shade it using some burnt sienna. This is going to be added to the cadmium-free orange that I was using earlier. In kind of the opposite way of me adding the whites, this is going to be applied more to the shadowed recessed areas of the orange. Again, I'm just taking the light source into account and pushing those colors to be a little more dramatic. This mixture is also going to be applied to the respirators. With the shadows in place, it's now time to start highlighting the vault symbol. And to do this, I'm going to mix together some cadmium-free yellow and cadmium-free orange. I'm going to start at the top with a smaller filbert brush and then I'm going to work my way down, accenting the top of the symbol as well as above the eyes. The same highlighting process is also going to be applied to the cheeks. And if you guys know me for anything when it comes to painting, I definitely love my layers, but it makes such a huge difference having all of these different paints built up. As a final highlight to the orange sections, I'm going to be applying just the cadmium-free yellow. And this is one of the few times that a cadmium is a little more transparent because it is a yellow, so I'm not hardly adding any water to it in the application process. Where if this is one of the reds or the blues, I'd add a lot more water to it to thin it down and make it more transparent. And I didn't mention it earlier, but I ended up leaving these print layer line artifacts on the respirators. Rather than them being completely smooth, I thought it just gave it a little more character. To add a rusty effect to all the metallic sections, the first step is going to be applying some Liquitex raw sienna down into all of the recessed areas. I'm not really careful with this process, I'm just trying to get the paint onto the surface, but I'm also not covering the metallics completely. I still want some of that silver to show through. A watered down version of this paint is also going to be applied to the battle damaged and recessed areas of the mask. Before some of these areas have a chance to completely dry, I go in with a wet brush and I move the paint around. But by using the raw sienna throughout the metallic sections and the upper section of this mask, it's actually tying the entire prop together through color harmony, making sure that one section doesn't have a dominant value and bringing a more cohesive look to the mask. Now, of course, if you're watching this and you want to paint your own, you don't have to do all of these steps. It's your prop, paint it however you would like. And I know a lot of people didn't go to art school like I did, so they haven't had all of these years of training with color theory and brush techniques. But if you are the type of person that wants to improve your painting abilities, I hope that extremely detailed and thorough tutorials like this can help you out. And if they do, be sure to tag me online so I can see what you're making. To take the rusty sections to another level, I'm going to be using one of my favorite products, Dirty Down Rust. Now when using this stuff, make sure that you thoroughly shake the bottle. Shake it, and when you think you're done shaking it, shake it some more, because it needs the chemical reaction of the components that usually settle to the bottom to mix together to give you that awesome rusty look. This liquid is going to be applied into the most recessed areas of the metallic sections using a detail brush. And if you happen to get it on sections that you don't want, it is water soluble, so a wet brush will take it off. But after this liquid has been applied, just let it set and do its thing for a couple of minutes. After the rust had done its thing, I could then go in with some more iridescent rich silver and pick out the highlights. Just like the whites and the yellows, I'm applying the paint to the uppermost areas where light would be hitting it. And I'm making sure not to cover all of the raw sienna and the dirty down that I've already applied. And at this point, if you're going for a realistic post-apocalyptic mask, this tutorial is everything you would need. But we're going for that Borderlands cel-shaded look, so it's time for the magic. And that's going to require some Mars Black, a liner brush, and a steady hand. Because now I'm going to water down some Mars Black paint and trace around some of the distinct features of the mask. I would say throughout the lining process, tracing around the vault symbol is probably going to be the hardest part. My recommendation would be to start with smaller, single, uninterrupted lines, because you can always go back and add a second line to make parts of it thicker, but moving in one continuous stroke and varying the pressure is the key. That's how you get a really clean look and an overall variation in the line weight. And I know that I make this look easy and you are going to need to practice, but I've painted more psycho masks than probably anybody in the world. So once you have the basic fundamentals of a technique like this down, it's just like riding a bike. The thing that's cool is that you can apply this technique to not only just the mask, but any of the props or costume pieces that you're making later on. And at the end of the video, I will have still images of this mask from the front and both of the sides. That way, if you don't really feel comfortable with coming up with your own line placement, you can just reference my mask to help with yours. Like a lot of the other specialty techniques, this is a process that you could overdo. So that's why I'm moving around to different parts of the mask and not really finishing one part completely. That way I can step back and see where exactly I might need more of these detailed lines. Now the black lines are definitely a key part to the cel shading process, but the white lines are the icing on top. And to apply these, I'm going to use Pro Acryl's Bold Titanium White. This is by far one of the most opaque and best white paints I have ever come across. Just like the black lines, this is going to be applied to the mask using that same liner brush, which is a Blick size 0. Just like the black lines, the white lines can be way overdone. These are going to be applied in much more selective areas, and really areas that I'm trying to draw the viewer's eye to. The white is also going to be applied to the most reflective highlight areas on the metallics as well. This mask did take me a couple of hours to paint and film, but I'm extremely happy with how it looks. To address the eye section of the mask, I'm first going to scratch up the inside using a hobby knife. Some black chiffon fabric can then be cut to fit. Now I'm going to have more fabric than I need, but I'm going to trim away the excess in the end. Using a low temp hot glue gun, the fabric can then be glued to the inside of the mask. Small scissors can then be used to trim away the excess material. And what this fabric is doing is giving the wearer the ability to see out, but nobody can see in to see your eyes. The eyes in the game are illuminated rectangles, but I'm going to try to fake that look just using some 2mm foam. The 2mm foam is going to be cut into small sections and the ends can be rounded over using a rotary tool. I'm then going to take some Liquitex Cobalt Teal and apply that directly to the foam. Using some more of that Pro Acryl White, this paint is going to be applied lightly to each piece. More of the low temp hot glue can be applied to the back side of the foam, and then the piece can be attached directly to the fabric. And because of how open this eye area is, you have plenty of room to see out. To make the mask wearable, I'm going to be using some 3/4 inch elastic as well as some tri-glides. The elastic is fed through one side of the tri-glide and then hot glued into place. These two sections can then be fed through the opposite tri-glide to make this strap section adjustable. And the reason I'm using the 3/4 inch elastic is because that's the size that's already built into the mask. The elastic can then be fed through these pre-generated slots, and then the ends can be glued down. And I forgot to mention it, but the elastic length itself is approximately 12 inches. This process can then be repeated for the lower section of the mask as well. Now, of course, if you did not want to use the pre-generated slots, you could use a different size elastic or EVA foam to create your own custom straps. To match the look of the game, I'm also going to add an 1.5 inch elastic to the top. One half of this is going to be wrapped around the top adjustable strap of the mask, while the other end is glued to the back side of the faceplate. And I do add extra hot glue around this piece just to make sure it stays in place. And comfort-wise, you could also add some strips of upholstery foam on the interior. To have the mask match the game, I went through my bins of old resin cast parts, and I found some old spikes and screws that are going to be perfect. Once the bottoms of each piece have been sanded, I could then spray them with some black Krylon primer. This will get them prepped and ready for some hand painting. And I'm just going to repeat the process the same as I had done for the metallics. I'm going to start by applying some iridescent rich silver. Then a light application of raw sienna. Another application of the iridescent rich silver is then applied on top of this. The black detailed lines can then be applied to all of the pieces. As well as the Pro Acryl white. With these pieces done, I can now attach them to the elastic. I start by applying the hot glue and attaching them directly to the material. The spikes are then applied to either side of the mask and measured out for the top strap. Now, because the elastic can flex, the hot glue could be compromised in the future. So to make sure that I don't have any issues, I'm going to take it one step further by using some screws and washers to secure them into place. I drill into the middle of each one of these pieces, and then after all these are drilled out, I can then attach the screws through the elastic. Now it doesn't matter how many conventions you go to or how hot it is, these aren't going anywhere. So like I mentioned earlier, if you need a reference, feel free to pause the screen and see exactly where I placed all of the black and white lines.
So hopefully you enjoyed this painting tutorial, and if you are using any of my cel shading techniques on your Borderlands props, be sure to tag me at SKSProps on Twitter and Instagram because I love seeing your creations. Until next time, strip the flesh and salt the wounds.